Okay, the second part of my Last Duchess. In part one, we went through the story and the contextual background to the poem. And as I said in that one, as long as you know the story and you know the main ideas, you don't need necessarily to understand every little bit. And obviously in the lessons that you have with your teachers, we'll go through in much more minute detail the meanings of each different line. If you get the gist and you get the idea, this will help you pick out some of the key quotes, those real wet sponges of a quote that you can squeeze so much out from. Okay, so what we're going to look at is the first part of the poem. Notice that there's no key quote there. Pick from these quotes, the ones that really resonate with you, the ones that make most sense to you, and the part three will be exactly the same. I'll pick out 4 or 5 key quotes from which you learn as many as you feel that you can possibly cope with, and their inferences and significance as well. Okay, so looking at the first part of the poem, notice how many times Browning repeats Fra Pandolf in his monologue as the Duke of Ferrara. So we've got to remember that this is Browning who writes it. It's so crucial, as it is with all of literature, that the creator is the poet, the writer, the playwright, and the characters that he or she creates are their creation. So it's the Duke of Ferrara created by Robert Browning. But in this characteristic, notice how often Fra Pandolf is repeated. And we need to think about what the Duke of Ferrara was. He was all about status. He was all about riches. He was all about power and control. And Fra Pandolf is an allusion to one of the great painters of the time. And the fact that he's been able to get such a great artist to come in and paint his Duchess is a thing of great pride to him. It's something that he can boast about. It's something that shows his enormous wealth, and he likes to show that off elsewhere as well. So he values the name more than the painting. He refers much less to the painting than the painter, and that's really crucial to the poem. The woman, his last Duchess in the painting, means nothing to him. We know that because of the story of the poem, that he's had her killed. But what does mean a lot to him, the reason he keeps this painting, is because it was done by Fra Pandolf. However, as much as he keeps that painting as a status symbol, a symbol of his wealth, he does keep it hidden. And actually the painting appears behind curtains. And look at this second quote here. Since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I. And again, like I like to do with punctuation, I've highlighted those in red. And the brackets are crucial. If you imagine on the wall a painting behind curtains, they're secretive, they're kept away. And so the brackets actually emphasize that sense of secrecy, that sense of his control, that only he is going to let who he wants to see the painting see it. And much in the same way, those brackets are that extra bit of information secreted away from the general public. So it emphasizes his secrecy, but his control. Only he opens the curtains. None puts by the curtains, so no one opens those curtains except I. The curtain I have drawn for you, but I. That repetition of the first person pronoun I. He is at the centre of everything that happens in his home, in his city probably. But that sense of control comes through the brackets, because he's secreting the painting away, and it comes through that repetition of I, and the emphasis of none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you. And notice it's an active verb. He is doing the drawing of the curtain. He's in control. I have drawn for you. Not the curtains which have been drawn. I have drawn the curtains. And that active verb shows that real control of the Duke of Ferrara. Okay, moving on. If they durst. Look at that particular line there. Durst, we need to know, is an archaic and old-fashioned form of the verb dares. If they dare. No one asks me if they dare. How does he rule then with the verb durst? Well, he rules by fear. It seems it's his household have to dare to ask him anything, have to be brave in order to even go and speak to him. That sense of control comes right the way through the poem, doesn't it? But that one verb, durst, is really, really crucial there. And it shows that he rules by fear. He's absolutely in control. Now, calls up that spot of joy. He's referring now to the painting. And as I mentioned in part one, Lucretia, his Last Duchess, on the painting is sort of faintly smiling, faintly blushing. Maybe Fra Pandolf had told her how lovely she looks and how paint could never capture her beauty. And all of that is hinted at by the Duke of Ferrara. So she is slightly smiling. What would Lucretia have actually felt with the Duke of Ferrara? Well, I would imagine that his sense of control, the way that he rules by fear, will have absolutely come across to Lucretia, and she too would probably be scared of him, and she would not have known how to react to compliments. She was actually only 17 years old herself, very young woman, and therefore quite naive, and wouldn't have known how to react with him and with the artist paying a compliment. Now, the fact that Fra Pandolf had managed to bring a spot of joy into her facial expression is a source of great discomfort to the Duke of Ferrara. He's very, very unhappy about that. But what we need to look at is Browning's choice of words, the spot of joy. Not a smile of joy, not a laugh of joy, not an enormous amount of joy, a spot of joy. Now that to me hints at Lucretia's lack of comfort. It hints at how she really didn't know how to react in front of Fra Pandolf. So it suggests to me a very brief happiness at best. Maybe she was pleased to be complimented by someone, because I dare say that she wouldn't have got much complimenting from the Duke of Ferrara. But maybe it's false happiness as well. Maybe she was forced to smile because that's what she felt she had to do for a painting. Either way, it's a very uncomfortable phrase, isn't it? That spot of joy. It suggests that she wasn't a very happy wife, not a very happy young lady, and who would blame her given the Duke of Ferrara's personality and his control. Okay, and also he talks about how the flush dies along her throat. We don't need to look too deeply into that. Think of the sinister tone there. Look at the verb, dies along her throat. The throat, a very vulnerable part of the body, so prone to attack in stereotypical murder senses. Actually, Lucretia, as I said in part one, was probably poisoned. But again, the act of poisoning happens with the throat. So it's a very vulnerable part of the body. And actually, by referring to that part of the body, the Duke of Ferrara is emphasising his control and her weakness and frailty. He's absolutely in control, and in this case, sadly, is in control of her life and her death, as he so powerfully exerts later in the poem. I've pulled out another couple of things to look for throughout the poem. So not specific quotes themselves, but ones where there's plenty of examples structurally within the length of the poem. So look for the rhetorical questions. How shall I say? A heart too soon made glad. Those rhetorical questions seem to be out of character for the Duke of Ferrara. He doesn't seem the sort of man who would need to ask questions. He gives answers, he gives commands. But no, quite a lot of the time, he actually asks rhetorical questions. And those rhetorical questions show his power in a number of ways. Firstly, because rhetorical questions show that he's giving himself time to think. And in those times to think, you would imagine if he pauses that another speaker might jump in. But no, there are pauses after his rhetorical questions which are not filled, and that shows his ultimate control. The representative that he's speaking to doesn't dare fill those gaps. They wait for him to speak before they're spoken to, before they're invited to speak. But also, those rhetorical questions show that he's slightly being wary and careful about his language. He doesn't want to say that he's had her killed. He doesn't want to say that he gave those commands directly to have her killed. A lot of the rhetorical questions show that he's thinking about his phrasing. He's being careful. As powerful as he is, he doesn't want to give himself away to murder. He doesn't want to give himself away for being unreasonable. As unreasonable as he sounds all the way through, he's still being careful with his words. And those rhetorical questions show that. The rhyming couplets and the monologue structure. Rhyming couplets show that sense of order, that sense of control. And actually the rhyming couplets are broken so often with the use of punctuation throughout. So it's quite an interesting juxtaposition of different styles there. Rhyming couplets usually show linking ideas together. In this case, the rhyming couplets show a very strong structure to the poem, which emphasise his control. He's going to speak all the way through. Nobody else is going to get a word in. And so that sense of structure, nobody's going to finish until he's had all of his rhyming couplets together. There's no squeezing in of any other bits of language, any other lines that don't rhyme, that don't fit to his order. But the speech itself is littered with semicolons, with colons, with dashes to show pauses and thought. There are caesurae in there, those full stops in the middle of the lines. And again, that emphasises his control. There are so many stops that could be filled with another speaker. When we have a normal conversation, when we pause, it's usually the signal for another speaker to join in. Not in this case. It's the fact that it actually just reflects his normal speech. And it is meant to be a monologue and meant to reflect the normal speech. But the significance of the pause is he's thinking, he's being careful, but it also shows his control because nobody else chips in.